Okay, hello dear students. In this video we are going to take a look at an overview about writing a research proposal. Last time, January the 23rd, we had a Google Meet session, and unfortunately the computer crashed, the system crashed, and I realized that the video file that resulted from the recording was totally lost. So sorry for that. I try to recapture as much of what we said last time as possible. And if there are any questions, you can any questions that you had already sent me before the meeting and I didn't answer, or the answers were lost, you can ask them again in the Google Classroom platform or on Moodle. So let's start. First of all, it's important to have an idea of what the research proposal is. So basically, most students or teachers, the majority of the academic community, thinks of the proposal as the plan and the outline, the plan or the outline, or both, of the research paper that is going to be, and the research also, that is going to be performed afterwards. And this is usually presented to the academic community. So most of the time it is the academic community, but there are other contexts different from ours in which you are also required to give a copy to potential sponsors. Let us say, for instance, you are doing study in pharmaceutical studies, or in chemistry. One of your potential audience, or the potential readers of your research proposal, might be a pharmaceutical company that will be interested in turning your research into a product, into medication. It can be a business company. If you are doing business studies, your research might interest a certain company that would implement your findings into management strategy or system or whatever. The same thing applies to computer science, biology, and so on and so forth. In our context, however, we are almost exclusively required to present to a purely academic audience or readership. Now, it is important to understand that when you talk about research proposal, there are two things to keep in mind. You are thinking of the final product. Remember, product process, the final product, the research paper, and at the same time, the research itself, the process, and the writing, of course. But there is the paper, the writing, and the product, the process of writing, and the final product, which is the paper. And there is before that the research, looking for information in sources, identifying information, collecting, organizing, and so on and so forth. So there are two axes that you have to keep in mind when you are thinking of a research proposal. Sorry. Also, you can think of the proposal, the research proposal, as an answer to the three major questions about your research and the research paper. I keep repeating research and research paper because some people might think exclusively about research, looking for information, and neglect the final product, what it should look like. Other ones might give too much attention to the final product and forget the process. So always keep in mind there is research, and you might have the subject of research methodology to give more details about this part of the research paper, the research itself, and the writing, the process of writing, and the final product, of course. So think of what are you going to write? What is your final product? But at the same time, think of the what in terms of the product. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. So you have, as I said, the what here concerns both the product, the final product, which is the written paper, and the subject matter, the topic, the specific topic you are dealing with, the issue, I would rather say, the how, the process, how are you going to do your research? So what are you going to write about? What question? What is your research question? What is your topic? What is your issue? And what is your final product? What is it going to look like? Also, how are you going to write that? The second major question, the methodology. If you say, for instance, we take imaginary topic, or I might give you real examples from my personal experience with students as a supervisor or as an examiner, jury member, and so on and so forth. So if you say what, the answer to the what question is, I'm going to analyze the influence of ideology on the evolution of the ideological aspect, the rhetorical aspect of children's literature, American children's literature. How the rhetoric in this literature changed through time. So this is my issue. This is my topic. So my final paper is going to be about this topic in particular. This is the what. And how are you going to do this? Well, I'm going to do this through tracing the evolution of the major ideological discourse in American politics, the major phases in American policy making, internal and foreign policy making, especially foreign policy, because this is the area where discourse and rhetoric is apparent in literary works. So I'm going to analyze to make the link between this, the evolution of this context, rhetoric, policy rhetoric in American American government or the American society, and analyze how this is reflected in the literary works of the time. So I'm going to take cases. I'm going to take examples or samples from each period and use them to illustrate how that era, or how the literature of that era carried in it a rhetoric that reflects the common ideology of the time. So what am I doing here? I'm telling you how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to do the analysis. And then there is the why. Perhaps many people neglect this part, and why. Maybe some of you might think about it in terms of, why did you choose this topic in the first place? What made you think of this topic in particular? This might make sense, okay, but this is not as important as the second why, the second type of why question, which I'm going to explain in a minute. Because the first one, if you ask anyone, why did you choose this topic in particular? Not all people choose sorry. So the second type of why question is concerned with the final outcome. Why would people read your paper or be interested in your research, in supervising, in reading your paper? Why would the community, the academic community, provide you with supervision and teaching and so on? Is it worth it? Is it academically worth it? So it's very much like thinking of a computer program, software program that you are going to create, and then you ask a company to sponsor you, and then you give them a justification what they will benefit from your product, in what ways they will benefit from your product. Same thing applies to the academic justification. What would the academic community benefit from your research later on? This is what we mean by the why, or the implications of your research. Sorry. Yeah. Now, to summarize, we can say that the research proposal is the rationale, the ground on which you justify your research and the final paper in general. What is the structure of a research proposal? There is no ready-made outline or structure of a research proposal that is applied by all people in all institutions. Every institution might have one or two elements different from the other institutions, but generally there are some parts that might be considered as logical and conventionally acceptable by the academic community. First, there should be an introductory part. This introductory part might be one of the three elements mentioned in the slide here, or they might be all of them together in a certain order. So the introduction, the abstract, and the background. If you opt for using an introductory part and you call it introduction or abstract or background, you might say that the three might be similar to one another, or similar in the fact that they all give an overview of the proposal and of the research in general before getting into the details, because the reader here, we're talking about potential supervisor or teacher or the academic community, needs to know the context, the academic context of your topic. Where are you going to put your topic? Where does it fit? In what area of studies does it fit? Not just in what module. You don't only think about module or discipline, literature, or British studies, or American studies. You have to be more specific than that to put it in a more specific context. And this is why you need an introductory part. Now, if we think about them separately, we might say that the introduction, the abstract, and the background are not very different from one another, but you can say the abstract usually comes first, and the abstract is like we are talking about the abstract of a research proposal. The same thing might also apply to the abstract of the research paper, the final paper. And the abstract in the final paper is more vital and more necessary. You might do without it in the research proposal, but you cannot do without it in the final paper. So it is good practice and good preparation to think of the abstract as early as the writing of the research proposal. So the abstract is a very brief and concise but precise. When we say concise, we don't mean superficial. It has to be precise, but at the same time it has to be brief. So you get straight to the point. This is what my research will be about. This is how it is going to be conducted. This is my major thesis. Okay, it's like telling people what your research is going to be about in one paragraph. Think of how you can summarize your whole research project, in one paragraph without getting into too many details, but at the same time without forgetting the most important points. Maybe before writing the abstract, take a piece of paper and write the keywords, the most important words of your in your research project, the most important concepts, the most important method you are going to follow, and put that into a paragraph. And this paragraph, of course, should be organized, not in terms of bullet points, but it should be a written paragraph. The introduction is self-explanatory. It is just a brief overview of what the research proposal is going to be about. And it's usually, it depends on how long the research proposal is, whether it is a master dissertation or doctoral thesis. And then you have the background. The background usually can be considered as the, how would I say, the origin of your topic. How did you get to your topic? The background can be considered as the movement. Presentation of the background can be considered as a preparation for the movement from the general to specific. Let us say your topic, your research question, are specific aspects of something bigger. What is this bigger background or context? How did you intellectually or academically move from background readings, background knowledge, or big subject area into topic and then into specific research question? It can be a historical background. It can be other types of background. So don't confine the word background to a historical background. So think about it in terms of academic background. Another and very important part of the research proposal is the research question. Maybe you should devote one specific section to it, and then explain the question in an entire paragraph or in an entire section, more than one paragraph if necessary. You can also think of the major research question and the minor research questions. What do we mean by major question and minor questions? The major question is the overall quest, if we can say so. You are seeking to find out or to discover through doing your paper. What is the final conclusion? You want to reach a final conclusion about a certain academic issue. And this conclusion is going to be an answer to a question about an issue. But in order to be able to have an answer, not the answer, one answer, an answer to this question, there are perhaps minor issues or minor questions that need to be answered before, okay? So we take the example of the rhetoric, the evolution of the rhetoric, the ideological rhetoric in children's literature through time, American children's literature through time. One of the minor questions might be where does the ideological rhetoric appear in literature? Is it in dialogue? Is it in narration? Is it in description and so on and so forth? Another question might be what are the major literary genres or the major literary works that can be used to illustrate this rhetoric, or what are the major genres, if we can talk about, or subgenres, for instance. All right. So research question and secondary research questions. There should be secondary research questions because it is very difficult to answer one question directly straight away. You usually break it up into smaller details and minor or more or secondary questions, the answer to which will contribute to the answer of the whole question, to your answer to the whole question. So what do you want to find out? And I'm sure you have already done a lot about research questions, making research questions, formulating research questions in the methodology class. Now, the research question is going, before I forget, the research question might very often be followed by a thesis. What is a thesis or a working thesis? In applied research, usually it's called a hypothesis. But in research based on documentation, like ours, civilization and literature, usually we talk about a working thesis. What do we mean by a working thesis? It's a preliminary answer to your research question, because you shouldn't go to, or you shouldn't start doing your research before already having an idea of what your answer from the research is going to be like. It might change later on, it might be extended, it might be narrowed down, it might be challenged, but you should have a working thesis from the beginning. What is a working thesis? It's a preliminary, maybe temporary, if you want to use another term, answer to your research question that you have started to develop from your background readings and from your previous knowledge. Research should not start totally from zero. When you start research you should already have had an idea of what your answer is going to be like. Now, review of the literature. What is review of the literature? Please, when we say the literature, we do not mean literature, literary works. We mean, when we say the literature, we mean the writings, the research, the article, the books that have been written about a certain issue. You are going to try and answer a question about a certain issue, but you are not the first one to have written anything, to have written something about the issue. Other people have written about it, and you are supposed to show your this experience of having read about the issue. So the review of the literature is a summary of the major, summary and a commentary, and sometimes criticism if necessary, or evaluation if necessary, and if possible, because it isn't always possible to do that, but preferably. And don't exaggerate. There are a lot of students who start criticizing researchers and writers in a way that makes them look a little bit academically arrogant. So try to avoid this. So a review of the literature is a summary, commentary, plus commentary about all the ones available to you, of course, the major sources, that the major research material and books and writings and publications that have discussed the issue. Of course, you're not going to find literature or writings that have already answered your research question in the way you are going to do it, using your own perspective and your own point of view. Otherwise, there would be no point in doing the research, because it's going to be a repetition. But whenever you are dealing with any issue, whenever you are trying to answer a research question about any issue, there are many aspects about this issue. There are a lot of aspects about the same issue you are writing about. And you will find that other people have talked about this issue from different sides, or different aspects about the issue. And when you read, you are going to start forming or making a certain conception about the issue, which will help you later on in your research. Think of the review of the literature as serving 2 or 3 major purposes. The first one, the review of the literature might help put your research into academic context. So it's like saying, listen, what I'm doing and what I'm trying to do is contributing to a discussion, to a conversation, if there is a conversation. We don't mean conversation, face-to-face conversation, of course. We mean the discussion of the issue from different perspectives. So you're going to say, so the first purpose might be to put your topic into context and to show the readers, the potential supervisors, that you are contributing to an already existing academic discussion. You are learning the art of making discussions, of making arguments, of defending arguments, of making statements, thesis statements. You are starting to get involved into this art of reading about things and then analyzing your readings and analyzing your research and drawing conclusions about the facts about certain issues, and then defending those issues inside this academic conversation about the issue. So contextualizing, academically contextualizing, not historically, but putting your topic in an academic context. The second purpose of the review of the literature might be to give the community confidence in your ability to handle the topic. When you have already done certain readings about a certain issue, and especially when you have done summaries about that, this shows your readers that you grasp the issue, the topic. You have a grasp on the topic, on the question, on the issue you are dealing with, and they can trust you with it because you have some background readings about it. You are not coming to the topic with a tabula rasa. Like, it's not a tabula rasa, it's not an empty sheet. There is something that you have already done in advance in order to be able to be qualified to deal with an issue. Because there are some students or some researchers that find some issues interesting and don't read anything about them, then think that because the issue is interesting, they are qualified. This makes them, the fact of being interested in a topic makes them qualified to do research about it, which is not always the case. Sometimes you need to already have certain background knowledge about certain issues, especially when they are complex and complicated issues that require much analytical skills. So as I said, the second purpose of doing the review of literature might be giving the reader the impression, or making the reader realize that you have a grasp of the topic. You grasp the issue and you can handle it. You have what it takes. If you don't do the review of the literature, people might be wondering, how much do you know about the topic and how are you going to handle it? It might be complex, it might be too ambitious for you. So you solve this problem, this dilemma, by the review of the literature. The third purpose may be as important as the previous ones, is to prove to your reader that you are not going to repeat what other people have done. Your research makes sense and your research is going to fill a gap. It isn't a repetition. So I have read, when you do the review of literature, it's like saying, I have read what other people have said about the issue, and I know what they said, and I am aware that I should not repeat what other people have done. And this is a good way to prove that your research is original. And then you explain, because you're going to explain how your research or your research paper is going to differ from the already existing literature about the issue. My research is going to come up with something new. This is how distinct it is from the rest of the literature. Um, Usually, you can think, as far as this purpose is concerned, you can think of finding a gap. When we say finding a gap, it doesn't mean there is a problem with the previous research. Previous writers who are university professors, who are maybe literary critics or historians. If you say previous writers failed to deal with such or such an issue in such or such a way, this statement is perhaps exaggerated. There are some students who fall into this trap, and I don't know how this happens, but anyway, don't fall into this trap of trying to make other people look less smart than you are, or less smart than they really are, or to make it look as if they forgot something. Hey guys, there is something you forgot to do, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to take care of it. It shouldn't be treated in this way, but it should be treated from the perspective that there is a gap. There is always going to be a gap. There is no single person who can handle or who can write about all topics, whatever, and no matter how much people write about certain issues, there is always going to be something else to add. It means there is a gap, there is something that other people did not say, or they did not say it in the same way I'm going to say it, and there is a gap, there is a need for my research. And how can you find this out? How can you find a gap in research material, that a gap that you are going to fill? You can only do this through reading. And how are you going to show this? Are you just going to say, hey, listen, dear teachers, I did my readings and I found out that there is a gap? You cannot do it this way. You should do some presentation of the major sources talking about the issue, and then show where the gap is, or where there is something to be added. So a gap is rather something to be added than something missing. Don't think about it as something that's missing, but as something that you're going to add to the discussion about the issue, which is not there already. Otherwise, the question is, what's the point of your research? Let us summarize. The review of the literature might serve a lot of purposes, 3 of which might be: first, putting your research into its academic context; second, showing your reader, your potential supervisor, that you are able to handle the topic, that you have done the necessary background readings, and that you know what people have said about the issue, so you have a starting point. Third, you are not going to you are going to prove that you're not going to repeat what other people have said, but rather there is a gap, there is a need for your contribution, and you are going to fulfill that need, and you are going to perform that task, if we can consider it from this perspective. Now, the research proposal should also contain methodology. Please don't think of methodology directly from the perspective of theory, approach, terminology, concepts, and so on. Think about it the other way around. Okay, so it is not theory, approach, methodology, and then your dissertation. It is your research. It is vice versa. It is the other way around, sorry. You think of your research first. What is your research question? What is your purpose? What do you want to find out? And then you start thinking about methodology. What is the best way? What is the most efficient way? A shortcut to finding that out, to answering that research question. And here comes methodology. So why you might say, why don't I just start doing things the way I see fit, and not read theories or about approaches, or about critical perspectives that are used by other people? Why don't I use my own? The question is, who are you? You are a researcher. You are a beginner. You are just beginning your research. You are just starting to do research. You have not done research yet. maybe you have done research that is not systematic, not supervised, not official, but you are starting research, and since you are a beginner, even if you're not a beginner, even if you become an expert researcher, you usually need already established norms and methodologies and ways of doing things that are accepted by the community. Because when you think of approaches to any field, to any discipline, they are usually agreed upon, they are usually conventional and accepted by the community. And it is necessary to have this academic modesty. It is very important to demonstrate academic modesty. At the same time as self-confidence. The self-confidence, academic self-confidence, and intellectual self-confidence are not mutually exclusive with humbleness and academic modesty. Academic modesty means knowing your limits, and you are a researcher, you are a student. You need to do things in a way, you need someone to tell you how to do things at the beginning, and then when you are able to do things on your own, you can. This will become something that's spontaneous and part of your daily life as a researcher. Of course, in case you carry on doing research, and even if you don't carry on research, as for instance, doctorate students, you might be required to do research in a company. You might work in a company and do research in marketing, or work in school, do research about students, about methodology, and so on and so forth. So how are you going to perform? When we say how, methodology, we're not talking about how are you going to write it. We're talking about how are you going to perform the research. A research proposal is a written paper, but it is not the final product. It is not the final paper. It is a preparation, a presentation, a plan for the future paper, and at the same time a plan for the process of research that will help you accomplish the task of writing the paper. So this research paper is preliminary, temporary. It is not the final paper. There is a lot in the research proposal that might be modified, sometimes dramatically, sometimes totally altered while after starting research. But you should start with something. Even if you are going to change it, you should have a starting point in terms of methodology, how you are going to do it. If you don't have a certain methodology with its terminology, with its concept, with its proponents in mind, you should at least have an idea of how you are going to proceed, what you are going to do in order to be able to answer the question. Are you going to compare, to contrast? Are you going to link context with discourse? Are you going to put theory into practice? Are you going to trace the evolution of a certain concept? Are you going to compare two literary works, two literary periods, two writers, a writer's performance at a certain time and at a later time? Are you going to link the writer's life with his or her literary work? Are you going to analyze the character's psychological development? Are you going to analyze rhetoric? Are you going to do a rhetorical analysis to put discourse into context? What are the tasks you are going to perform while you are doing when you are going to do the research? What tasks are you going to perform in order to be able to give an answer to the research question? So this is what we mean by methodology. There are different levels of complexity and of let us say, in terms of sophistication when you talk about methodology. The basic level is just say how you are going to perform your research, what you are going to focus on exactly. And a more sophisticated one would be using theory, concept, using terminology, which is something that you might be assisted in doing by your supervisor or by your teachers. The following point is the implications, the importance, the outcome of your research. This is the why. So in the first parts, the research question, you have a research question about a certain issue, the what, review of the literature, what other people have said about the issue. Methodology is the how, the implications, the importance, the outcome. What is the result that is going to come out of your research, and how is it significant to the academic community? Why should people read your paper? What are they going to learn from it? What result will come out of your research, and in what ways is this result, outcome finding, going to benefit the community in terms of knowledge, or in terms of skills, or in terms of analysis? You might say, my research is going to shed light on, to demonstrate, you make a point to demonstrate that such or such a statement is true, or to challenge a certain common conception or misconception about something, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, after that, when you give the importance of your research in terms of its contribution to the academic literature about the issue, you might follow this by a preliminary outline and schedule. Why do we say preliminary or temporary? Because we have not started doing the research yet, which means that there might be certain areas that you will only discover while starting or after starting research. And because of this, there are certain things that might be changed or modified later on. But you should have a skeleton or a sketch, if we can say so. If you are making a drawing, if you are drawing a painting, if someone is creating a painting, an artist is creating a painting, they usually use a sketch. It's like an outline of the person you're going to draw, or the scene, or whatever it is. So you should have a preliminary outline, not a detailed one. You're not going to write table of contents with page numbers because you haven't written the research paper yet. But you should have an outline, an already imagined or suggested outline with a certain division in mind, and then later on there is nothing wrong with changing it if it is necessary, and if, of course, it is agreed upon by your supervisor. We will discuss this later at a later session. Schedule, preliminary schedule, perhaps. Maybe in our context, schedule is something that is usually decided by the administration, but think it's a good idea to have a schedule in mind and to give your supervisor especially this schedule, so that you commit yourself. And I tell you this from personal experience. When you have a schedule, when you have some deadlines, you are more motivated. When you don't, you usually postpone things until, it gets a bit late, and there is accumulation of tasks, accumulation of work, and then this leads to frustration, and in the end this will make you have a work that is not well organized, and that is lacking in many ways, last minute modifications, and a lot of things will be lacking in your research. So it's a good idea to have an outline and to have a schedule in advance, even if the outline will be modified, and even if you are not going to be able to respect the schedule 100%. It is always better to have a schedule. Having a schedule is always better than not having one at all. Because when you don't have any schedule and you'll be left to yourself, even when you're not told that you have a certain deadline, you will keep postponing work until it accumulates, and it becomes frustrating and frightening sometimes, and you would panic. So I think this schedule is more important than what a lot of students think, okay? Don't wait for the administration to give you schedules and deadlines. You have to put pressure on yourself. And it is even better because you will have more, you feel more at ease when you're obliging yourself to do certain things at certain times. Now, the last point is preliminary bibliography. What do you mean by preliminary bibliography? Isn't it the same as review of the literature? Not necessarily. Because the review of the literature is like the sources that are your starting point. Okay? So what is your starting point? When you talk about review of the literature, you're talking about the starting point. How did you get to this topic in this research question? You will say, I read such or such a book or such an article. They inspired me, or I started thinking about it, and then I came up with this question, and I became interested in trying to find out such or such a thing. So this is the review of the literature. This literature, this research you read, which led you to the topic, is not necessarily the one you are going to do in your research. It's not, I repeat, it is not necessarily the sources you are going to use in your research. Maybe you can use all of them, some of them, none of them. Why? Because these sources help you come up with a question, the answer to, or the information you are going to find, the facts, the details, the data you are going to look for in order to be able to answer your question are not necessarily found in the literature you have reviewed. They might be found in other sources, in primary and secondary sources. So bibliography here at the end, preliminary. Why preliminary? Because it's going to be extended. You're going to find out more sources, more books, and try not to get too many of those because they might confuse you later on. But I won't give you any number. I won't say you need at least 10 books or 5 books or 20 books or whatever. But it's up to you. Think of how many sources you have found out so far, not necessarily read. Okay, in a review of the literature, you should have at least had a general reading or skimmed through the sources. But in a preliminary bibliography, you are not obliged to have read the sources already, because the bibliography is about the sources you are going to use in research. And since we are talking about research proposal, you have just proposed the research, you haven't started it yet. So even if you have sources which you haven't read yet, but which you consider as relevant and as potential sources and material of your research, you can mention them in the bibliography. This is important because you are going to tell your supervisor, Ms. or Sir, don't worry, I already have some sources in mind, and I have something to start the research with. Especially think of different types of sources. I'm not personally, I'm less interested in the number of sources than in the variety of sources. Don't say I have 20 sources, and then I look at your outline and I find out that your 20 sources can only contribute to one sub-chapter, and the rest of your outline, the rest of your topic, of your research question, has nothing in terms of sources and material to use. So if you think of the minimum sources, do not think in terms of number, but think in terms of variety. Okay, so sources that talk about different aspects of your topic, something to start with, and don't have, it's better to have a variety, 10 or 15 sources that are diverse and varied, of course, all related to your research question, than to have 20 or 30 sources already but talking only about one aspect of the issue, because later on, when you try to deal with the other aspects, you will perhaps waste a lot of time looking for other sources. So preliminary bibliography, the sources, articles, books, documentaries. It depends. Now there are a lot of YouTube videos that are as academically valuable as articles, especially YouTube videos by universities. Sometimes lectures. There are lectures that are recorded and made into YouTube videos. So the sources, the bibliography is not necessarily one type or the other. Should be varied in terms of format, and it should also be varied in terms of themes. So preliminary, temporary bibliography is a very important part of your research proposal. We might later on think of more things to add to the research proposal, but in the meantime, try at least to cover these major parts of the research proposal. Introductory or background part, the research question with a thesis. Sorry, I forgot to write this down. With a thesis, a working thesis. Review of the major sources that talked about your issue. The how you are going to perform your research. If it is possible, if you have already found out an official systematic academic approach, whether that's literature or civilization, that can help you do your research, that you can use as a starting point, well, then it's good. If not, you should at least have an idea of the tasks you need to perform to be able to answer your question. The implications, the importance, the outcome of your research, what will come out of your research, in what ways will your findings help the academic community become more knowledgeable or more enlightened or more skillful in analyzing things, or have more insight, more perspective about the issue. Preliminary outline on and schedule, basic one, not a detailed one. At least, for example, in the outline, you might say, you might think of 3 big ideas or 3 big parts, and then explain each one briefly, or divide each one into 2 or 3 other subparts. And later on, you get into more details when you start doing research. You can change and modify the outline. The schedule. It's better to have a schedule in advance. We can think about schedule at another time and have a sample or an example. And preliminary bibliography, the sources you are going to start your research with. Not the sources you have already read, but the ones you are going to read and you are going to use as sources of data and of evidence for defending your thesis and for giving evidence to your thesis. So far for writing a research proposal, there might be more to add in perhaps the chat sessions or on Google Classroom as a reaction to this video. Please watch this. Please, after watching this video, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them on any platform available to you. Thank you for your attention and see you next time.